Excellencies, on behalf of the Hellenic Centre Executive Board, which I serve, I would like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us. Promises to be an interesting and stimulating discussion. I would also like to convey the apologies of our Centre's director, Mrs. Agatha Kalispera, who unfortunately was not able to be here with us tonight. The topic of our event, which is organized by Southeast European Studies at Oxford and is supported by the Greek Embassy in London and as well as the Hellenic Centre, is beyond the Greek crisis, and it will aim to shed light and enable us to understand the ties linking the Greek diaspora with our homeland. We have with us a panel of distinguished speakers, and Dr. Anastasaki, Director of Southeast European Studies at Oxford, will introduce them to you. Before I hand you over to our next speaker, Sir David Maiden, may I ask you to switch off your telephones, please? Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I shall thank the Centre and others more formally later. What is this evening all about? Well, it's about SEESOX at Oxford University, it's about our Greek Diaspora Project, and it's about our very generous donors. SEESOX has existed as part of Oxford University for nearly 20 years. It looks closely at the politics, geopolitics, and economies of all the countries of the region, from Rijeka in the west to Trabzon in the east, from Iași in the north to Akrotiri in the south. It also has to concern itself with the triangle of uncertainty around this area. Now SEESOX is also working on the question of diasporas, starting with the Greek diaspora in the UK and beyond, as our title has it. The benefactors who have so generously funded this work form the basis of the Hellenic Advisory Board. You can find their logos on the back of the flyer which has been circulated this evening. It reads like a who's who of the world of Greek banking and business, and also has very strong UK connections as well. There are too many to read out individually, which is a sign of their magnificent collective response to our appeal and to the tireless work of the first chair of the board, Nikos Karamouzis. This is an astonishing achievement. On the front of the flyer, there are those who have contributed so fully and in various ways to this evening: the Hellenic Centre, the Greek Embassy, and the Ambassador personally, Odysseia, Hellenic Gourmet Limited, and Stasis. Just to explain, this evening is divided into three parts. We start with 4 introductory speakers who will add their words of wisdom, and I shall introduce them in turn. The panel will then address different aspects of the diaspora. Again, the names are on the flyer, a mixture of SEESOX and the donors. The listed panelists will be joined by the Greek ambassador and by Othon, and Calypso Niklaidis will kindly chair. And for the third part, well, it's over to you, the audience, to ask questions and make this a more general discussion. Well, that's enough from me, I'm sure you'll agree. Now we have the opening remarks, starting with the Ambassador of Greece in the UK, His Excellency Mr. Dimitris Karamitsos Tsiras.
Thank you, Sir David. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening, and I'm very happy to see so many of you attending this event. I know that our Archbishop, His Eminence, Mr. Nikitas, who is himself a prominent member of the Greek diaspora of the United States, was intending to attend and offer us also his thoughts, but I think last minute engagements prohibited from doing that. I want also, before I say a few words, to thank and congratulate SEESOX and the team for completing the first phase of this far-reaching project, about which you will hear later, which is a crucial project, but also sensitive and complicated. Throughout Greece's history, and in particular during the almost 200 years of the existence of the modern Greek state, the Hellenic diaspora has engaged in a two-way interaction with the motherland, both as a recipient of actions and as instigator of them. This cycle of constant flow between the motherland and the diaspora centers around the world has proven to be a wealthy flow of inspiration and a real lifeline for both. The international conjuncture today is of critical importance. On one hand, we live through a period of drastic and occasionally dramatic changes in the international scene, and on the other, Greece too is reshaping itself as it emerges from the recent economic and social crisis and needs all of its resources to face the future. It is therefore no coincidence that at this juncture, the motherland relies on the fraternal support of individuals and groups outside Greece, but at the same time, Greeks abroad expect that they will have the opportunity to remain actively involved in their homeland affairs and receive the homeland's active support in their efforts, especially in times of uncertainty as we currently go through in the UK. So it's evident that in all respects, the Greek Diaspora Project is timely and opportune, as it deals with an issue of great significance for Greece, and this cannot be stressed strongly enough. As most research and related data available on the matter are outdated or not well substantiated or verifiable, the project, once completed in full, will provide a holistic scientific database which will offer both to policymakers and to diaspora institutions a whole new foundation to build on. And I hope that today we do not fall prey to the misconception of the past that the relationship of the state with diaspora was unidirectional, meaning that the role of the diaspora Greeks was exclusively or mainly to help the motherland. It's not that. Naturally, over time, there were several attempts to record the width and depth of the diaspora, especially in the larger concentration points around the world, in an effort to assert its impact and influence. In this respect, and to my understanding, the Diaspora Project in question differs as it goes further than a theoretical exercise or a statistical research. On the contrary, the project is intended to assess the strength of the Greek diaspora activities and to work with the relevant stakeholders aiming at optimizing the diaspora's impact worldwide. The Foreign Ministry of the Hellenic Republic, as you heard, supported this effort from the start, seeing the necessity to have an accurate, quantitative and qualitative reflection of the diaspora. And I want at this point to congratulate also all other sponsors and supporters of this project. I'm looking forward to the discussion that will follow and to hear your views on the matter. I thank you very much.
As the Ambassador mentioned, His Eminence the Archbishop of Thyatira and Great Britain, Nikitas, is not able to be with us here this evening, but he kindly sent Father Chrysostom, who is the personal representative of the Archbishop, to speak on his behalf. Please come to the podium.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you already know, His Eminence could not make it due to his overwhelmed program and other prearranged commitments. But he asked me to deliver his apologies. He wanted to be here, but he cannot. And also his congratulations for this excellent meeting with distinguished speakers and guests. He was an immigrant himself. He immigrated at his early age from Greece to the United States, and then he came here after visiting some other countries all over the world. He served as a bishop in Hong Kong, I think, for some years, and he felt in his flesh all the challenges and the difficulties that we, as members of the diaspora, every one of us can experience. And he struggled to maintain the old with the new, the Greek identity with all the challenges of that a new culture in which he lived in involves. And doing so, he is very much aware of all the importance of this meeting to address the contemporary reality of the diaspora and the significance of dealing in a more systematic way and to find ways to establish a connection of Greek diaspora in all over the world. He wishes the best to this meeting, and his prayers is for that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will now ask Mr. Nikos Karabouzis, the honorary chair of SEESOX Hellenic Advisory Board, to come to the podium.
Thank you, David. Your Excellency, Ambassador of Greece, distinguished guests, I'm delighted to welcome you at the first chair of the SEESOX Hellenic Advisory Board and to have the privilege to contribute and support the birth and maturity of a very original project, which during the last years has developed into a major program with rich research output and high visibility. The name Oxford is synonymous with academic achievements, an institution where knowledge, expertise, and deep understanding of the issues are taking center stage. I consider myself to be a bridge between the donor community and the educational sector, represented by one of the best universities in the world, to show how private and public partnership can produce high achievements. When 3 years ago or 4 years ago, Othon and Calypso approached me to explore the possibility of supporting SEESOX and the Diaspora Project and chair the advisory board, I immediately accepted the offer because I consider it a great idea, a timely project, and a very honorable proposal for me. I'm a strong believer in corporate social responsibility, especially for corporations and donors to support consistently high-quality research with social and policy implications, and we have only a responsibility to promote the broader national interest in Greece and abroad. So far, the Greek Diaspora Project has been a leader in renewing scholarship and applied research on the diaspora and homeland relationship at a period when this relationship has become central for Greece's future prospects. Today, as perhaps most of you know, the new government has raised hopes, expectations, and optimism that at the end they will dare to implement much needed reforms, especially in education, health, the judicial system, and public administration, They would create a more friendly policy towards investment and growth, and a new growth strategy centered around a more extrovert and open economy, and a dramatic recovery of private and public and foreign investment, which during the crisis really collapsed. One of the sectors that really had a major problem with the Greek crisis was the investment sector. It collapses from 25% of GDP to 11% of GDP. And without a strong recovery on the investment in Greece, you should not expect growth rates above what you see today. In this context of the new Greek strategy, hopefully, deepening meritocracy, modernize operations, introduce digitalization and new technologies across the public and public economy and social life, and attracting capable diaspora experts to the Greek economic life should be crucial pillars of the new growth strategy. Greece, in my own view, once more, has a great opportunity and a chance to become an attractive place to live, produce, invest, create an open society and economy. This opportunity should not be wasted. Note that high unemployment in Greece in the previous years, even today, the unemployment is above 17%. High tax rates, the highest in Eurozone today, and the lack of hope for a better life and opportunities during the crisis sent more than 500,000 of our citizens to seek opportunities and a new life abroad. This is an amazing brain drain, a devastating loss for our economy and our society. It should be a policy priority, in my own view, to offer all these compatriots and other people that left the country before abroad the opportunity to vote, but most importantly, to create suitable economic and social conditions to make Greece an attractive place, because we do need the expertise, the drive, the commitment, and entrepreneurship of the people that left Greece to an unknown and difficult destination. This is a very valuable human and productive resources that should be deployed in a new Greek strategy. Finally, after 3 years as a chairman of SEESOX Advisory Board, and after the successful launch of the Hellenic Advisory Board and the end of the first phase of the program, I have decided that the time has come to step down from the chairmanship, but remain a member of the board and a committed member to help the program grow. I'm a firm believer of a rotating chair in these public life offerings, in this type of activities, and we should offer the opportunity to other colleagues to lead and contribute to this great project. The advisory board today has selected Alexandros Sargeorgiou, Chairman and CEO of Eurolife Insurance, one of the best run insurance companies in Greece, as to replace me. This is a great choice, which is the full advisory board endorsed and supported. Alexandros would lead the second phase of the project of scaling up and further expand this project. In closing, I would like to thank all the donors for their support all these years. Without their generosity and active support, this project would never have taken off. And they supported this project in difficult times, in years that Greece was in deep recession and during the crisis. So we should recognize that they stood by the project, they stood by us, and I'm really thankful that they were convinced to help in this endeavor. I would like also to thank all the SEESOX people for their cooperation, friendship, and devotion to the project. And it was a privilege for me to work with Othon Anastasakis, Kalypso Nikolaidi, David Madden, Julie Adams, Mr. Kamaras, Mr. Pratsinakis, and Mrs. Kalainji. all forming a very powerful team at SEESOX, and we wish them every success. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Honorary Chair. And now, as the final speaker in this part of the programme, we have Othon, Director of SEESOX, who will come to the podium. Yes.
Thank you very much, David. Now, I have the pleasure of being what we call the principal investigator of this Greek Diaspora Research Project. Elusive, cryptic word, right? But this is what we use in the academia when we want to say that this is the coordinator, the manager of the project. And I have been very, very excited to be managing this project for the last 3 years, which is open-ended, multifaceted, and very, very interesting. Now, the idea of the Greek Diaspora Project was born in the midst of the economic crisis, at a time of great uncertainty and a lot of depression, both economic as well as psychological. It started originally with a very simple question, a very simple normative question, on how Greece's diasporic populations could contribute to the country's exit from the crisis. We assumed from the beginning that the Greek diaspora can be a force for good and progress, although we are also fully aware of the limitations of that, and that diasporas sometimes are often the reflection of the homeland's strengths and weaknesses. Yet in the new globalized environment of communication, travel, and connectivity, the engagement of diasporas to the home country can take different forms beyond the traditional foreign policy or lobbying or financial remittances. So in order to get the answer to the question, how can we make the most of the Greek diaspora abroad, we needed first to understand better what is meant by Greek diaspora in the contemporary globalized context. And while we were asking this question, we were also witnessing that the Greek diasporas were changing drastically as a result of the economic crisis, when the numbers were increasing exponentially, adding new layers to the already existing populations abroad. This meant that we had to do a lot of analytical work, being primarily an academic project, but which we wanted to make useful to the policy-making community. We therefore built our priorities around 3 big areas: the economic, the political, and the philanthropic. All 3 important remittances in the wider sense of the term. Thanks to the generous funding of the donors who believed in our project from the beginning, many of whom are present today, we built our team in the UK, and in cooperation with colleagues in Greece, Australia, the United States, we kicked off this very ambitious agenda. During the course of our work, our analytical prism was affected by the notion of crisis, and we asked questions such as, how has the crisis affected outward migration? How has it redefined economic relationships? Has it affected philanthropic giving, and for which sectors? How has it transformed political engagement between diaspora and homeland? And these are the issues that we will be presenting today. So as a team, we were also obviously inspired by the richness of our intellectual environment in Oxford, which provided an excellent backdrop, being multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, and of a neutral terrain in terms of these kind of issues. And at this point, I would like to ask Stefan to put this film, because the film will speak for me on this occasion. That was a film that done during our last conference that we did last year, and it was actually a gathering of many diaspora experts in Oxford.
The SEESOX Greek Diaspora Project is global, it's huge, and it's very, very encompassing. The Greek diaspora is an ongoing phenomenon. It's not a recent one. In fact, it goes right back into, if you like, prehistory. The Greeks established settlements throughout the Mediterranean in periods before the historical records. Initially, we thought Oxford is a new place for Greeks to settle in, but actually, there are records of a coffee house under college that was established for Greek students of theology. I think it was the 18th century. So there have been Greeks in Oxford before now, but the influx of Greeks to this town in the last 3 to 4 years has been remarkable It's visible and audible.
Oxford has a tradition in Greek studies. The College of St. Anthony, as well as the University of Oxford, has been a very, very natural space for us to continue the study of Greece. At the same time, on the particular topic of diaspora and migration, again, the University of Oxford is very important. Not only in terms of conceptual analysis, but it's also important in the sense that there's a good comparative environment for us.
We created SEESOX in the early 2000s, really at the intersection of two traditions. On one hand, this Oxford University has a lot of Greekness in it. It has the biggest pool of ancient Greek scholars. It has also Byzantium studies. And then it has modern Greek studies and has had scholars in modern Greek studies for a long time. So in a way, SEESOX in the early 2000s was a rebirth and trying to affirm the place of this region, Southeast Europe, in Oxford, and stating we can't just study Greece by itself. It has to be studied and understood in the context of a region.
Diaspora has always been a very important actor in Greece's development, historically. It's not just that it is numerically very strong and spread all around the world, but at the same time, it's been contributing a lot in the development and the progress or even the backwardness of the country. The mission of our project, if I can call it that way, is about doing solid analytical work on the topic of Greek diaspora and its role in contemporary Greece. We want to produce research as well as activities and conferences, and one of the things that we're actually doing is our first very, very big conference on Greek diaspora, and we've got around 40 speakers, in my opinion, the best of the best in terms of Greek diaspora studies.
Through this conference, we aim to map the state of the art in the field of Greek diaspora studies, but also bring together younger and more established researchers in order to create a network of scholars that would work synergistically to build our knowledge on the Greek diaspora.
The different levels of analysis that we have chosen to engage with in the Diaspora Project are the political, the economic, the philanthropic and the social. My part in the research is the political section. I am looking into how the Greek state engaged with its diaspora and in specific how political elites and Greek parties have addressed the Greek diaspora.
Every diasporic reality is also a government project. It's a project. It's going to be instrumentalized or utilized or maximized from the point of view of the home country and especially its government. But at the same time, the other way around, there is agency, there is willingness to act on the part of the diaspora members also, or at least there's a spectrum of willingness, a spectrum of attitude that are also irrespective or related to the attitudes from the homeland.
It's important to be able to produce some policy-relevant information that could hopefully be useful to various departments in Greece, to diaspora groups, and be a little bit more normative as well. And by normative, I mean what should be done and what can be done in terms of this relationship between diaspora and homeland Greece.
In this particular case, I'm not interested in typologies of diaspora. I'm not interested in how certain individuals identify themselves in terms of diaspora and diasporic consciousness, although this is very important.
One of our main deliverables is a Greek diaspora map, which is actually the digital representation of the Greek communities abroad. We have been given certain data from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which we managed to recategorize. This gave us the ability to see the profile of these communities, like, for example, if they are religious or cultural, and at the same time see if they have a certain connection with Greece, like, for example, where the members of these communities come from, if they come from the Peloponnese or if they come from Crete, etc., etc.
My own research within the project primarily focuses on the study of the new Greek emigration, particularly within the context of free movement in the European Union. I'm studying migration decision-making, the socioeconomic trajectories of migrants abroad, feelings of belongingness, the development of transnational ties, flows of remittances, but also the impact of migration on relationships, families, and the future plans of the migrants.
And of course, here in Oxford, we're a bunch of scholars, academics, and we are studying the diaspora as an object of study, although we ourselves are part of it. But we're also really interested and passionate in trying to hear as many voices from Greek groups, Greek individuals, communities from around the world. And we're working with our friends in trying to build an interactive map where people contribute their voices. And we already have wonderful elements of it, but we really hope that anyone from around the world watching this will want to be part also and take part and send their message to us so that we can boomerang in to the rest of the world. That would be brilliant, so we want to hear from everyone.
That's the film made by Nikos Taboulopoulos, and let me make one qualifying comment here. We don't actually, circulate in Oxford dressed in gowns like you saw at the beginning. That was a very special day, which is called Insignia, when Oxford gives honorary degrees, and then they have this party where we have to wear our gowns. And just to follow up on Calypso's last point in this film, since then we've been joined indeed by more and more scholars. We have developed a rich output which you can find on our website. We have come up not always with solid answers, but with some interesting and original findings and tentative conclusions and recommendations on many of some of these areas. And before I stop myself, I would like to thank the Diaspora Team, which has been at the heart of the project, Calypso, Manolis, who's the deputy coordinator of the project, Fotini, Kira Gartsou Katsouyani, Marilena Anastasopoulou, Irina Lapsina, Lambrini Rory, Eli Paleologu, René Herson, Paolo Serodio, Esgi Basaran, Mehmet Karli, Dorian Singh, this is the team in Oxford. Last but not least, David Madden, and Julie Adams, who is the administrative heart and soul of SEESOX. She's sitting here. Antonis Kamaras, one of the founders of the project and of the idea, and our representative in Greece, Anastasia Kafe, Nikos Taboulopoulos, Stavros Argyropoulos in Athens, Theo Paraskevopoulos from Germany, Harry Phil Theotokatos, he's here from Australia, he's doing research for us from Australia, Nick Ignatovich in Amsterdam, Katerina Lagos and Yorgos Anagnostou in the US, all of whom have contributed to make this project a global sensation. And I would like to thank Nikos Karamouzis once again. I look forward to working with Alexander Sergegiorgiou in the next phase. And now I will pass the baton to my lovely friend and colleague, Calypso Nikolaidis, who is the chair of SEESOX. She's been an inspiration for this project and for other SEESOX projects. And Calypso has also written lately her book on Brexit, Exodus, Reckoning and Sacrifice, in case some of you are interested in her story, which relates to Greek mythology. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As you've heard from our wonderful introductory speeches, it's now time to change the format of this meeting and really to have a conversation in two steps. First, we're going to have a conversation. You'll see it's quite a wide panel here, so don't be afraid. We're not going to lecture you. We're going to really provide you with very short introductions, have a bit of a conversation among ourselves, and in doing so, exchange between our scholarship, everything you've heard about the Diaspora Project in Oxford, and some of the members of the board, and I'm going to introduce them as we go along, but our distinguished members will bring a pragmatic and anchored perspective on the issues at stake. But at the end of the day, can I say that you, the audience, you're not just here to listen, right? You are not just an audience. You are yourself, many of you, the actual object and subject of this whole project. I imagine that in the audience there are many friends of Greece, of course, but there are also many members of the Greek diaspora. Some of you may be second, third generations. Others, you've been mentioned already as brain drain. I think you're brainy. Whether you're a drain or not, we'll discuss that. But we want to hear from you, your reactions, how you live it, how you think it. So this is what's going to happen in the second part of our conversation. So to get us started, I will turn back to Manolis. Manolis has already been introduced, so doesn't need to be introduced, or an Asses Fellow at Oxford. And Manolis, you've worked on this big wave of movement in the rest of Europe from Greece due to the crisis. And as Othon was reminding us, the crisis itself is a contested idea. Please tell us more about this wave and how it relates indeed to the issue of brain drain. Is it all about brain drain? What else is going on?
Absolutely. So the crisis has triggered the resurgence of large-scale emigration from Greece. And it led to what may be categorized as the third major outwave of emigration from modern Greece. The first having taken place in the end of the 19th century up until 1920s, and having the United States of America as its prime destination. The second one taking place in the post-war era up until the mid-70s, and having the Northwest European states as prime destination, but also Australia and Canada. And interestingly, since then, emigration from Greece was very limited, especially in the years before the crisis, preceding the crisis. The Greeks had one of the lowest emigration rates, in the European Union. And according to a number of surveys, Greeks were recorded to be among the least positive towards long-distance mobility. Obviously, this drastically changed after 2010, which is the year that we see emigration starting to increase, and increase rather exponentially, one may say. So up until now, as it was mentioned, the total outflow of people is estimated to approximately 500,000 people. And to this number, 400,000 Greek citizens, because to this number we need to add an equally high number of migrants in Greece that also left Greece in large numbers, being also impacted by the crisis. From these 500,000 people, approximately 400,000 are currently living abroad, because obviously when we speak about flows, we may double count people who go, return, and go again, and this number doesn't take into account return, right? So the accurate number currently should be around 400,000 people. And the vast majority of this new wave has as its destination European states. And I really think that we need to conceptualize and assess and understand it in the context of the freedom of movement within the European Union. If the second emigration wave took place in the context of bilateral agreements, it was regulated by them, or through unofficial ways. Currently, it is done spontaneously by people exercising the right of freedom of movement, settlement, and work within the European Union. So it is not only that the freedom of movement shapes the actual destinations, but it also determines the large scale that migration has taken place. And the second characteristic, I think, the most characteristic of this new wave is related to what you asked, Calypso, and is the fact that a large number of this migration wave concerns people of high educational attainment. And in fact, this is possibly the most commented aspect of this migration in the public discussion in Greece. And obviously it is related to concerns that this out-migration of a highly educated workforce may bring the Greek economy into a cycle of underdevelopment. And in that sense, brain drain itself has indeed acquired alarming proportions during the last years, but certainly justify the attention given to it. But I would like to say, and conclude with that this discussion, this debate on the brain drain and the new migration is characterized by two misconceptions. The first one is that the two are often linked in a causal relationship, as if the crisis caused brain drain. The brain drain was, in fact, an ongoing phenomenon which increased exponentially because of the crisis, but it was not caused per se by the crisis. Its structural preconditions predated the crisis itself, and they have to do with the structure of the Greek economy, the lack of demand for an educated workforce from the private and public sector. And we can get into the discussion about those reasons. And the second thing that I would like to comment about how brain drain and the new migration is discussed is that often those two terms are used interchangeably and as if they refer to the same thing. And actually that's not the case, because it is not only the young and educated that left Greece, it is also older people that have left Greece. It is also people with lower educational attainments whose experiences are often silenced. And I would like to conclude with that for now. I think that brain drain and the new migration are obviously linked, but they are not identical.
Well, thank you, Manolis. And indeed, listening to you, if I was a Sherlock Holmes wanting to understand how did this happen moment by moment, the first person I would turn to get this story right would be Mr. Yannis Parakis, who indeed is the CEO, as most of you know, of Athens Airport. And in this role, you've been joining the Athens Airport more than 20 years ago, and you've seen it all, and you've come up with this idea of commuting diaspora, a very fortuitous term, which hints at the fact that from your standpoint, through Athens Airport, you can tell us much more on how this movement in and out happens.
Okay, thank you. So I've been out of Greece for more than 17 years, and I've tried 2 times to come back. The second landing was more successful. So I feel very close to the diaspora issues, and obviously we as an airport, as a serious business, the first thing you need to do is understand your customers, your clients. So since 2001, when we started operating the new airport in Athens, we started surveying our passengers, and with demographics and their priorities and their way of travel and the likes. So if you look at the passenger numbers of the yellow curve there, we started before the crisis with about 16.5 million passengers at the airport. We went down with the crisis, together with developments of Athens, but ever since we have a very good growth. We ended up last year at about 24 million passengers. When we talk million passengers in our language, in aviation, obviously somebody who comes or lands at the airport at some point, he goes back again. So we count individuals 2 times as enplanements. So when we talk about individuals, we mean about 12 million people. Now, these people, when we ask them what their residence is, you see that 7 million, about 60% live outside Greece and 40% within Greece. So if we look at the people that live outside Greece, obviously some of them are foreigners, as we call them, and some of them are Greeks. Now, in our work, when we measure what we call diaspora, we asked for the prime citizenship. So we don't apply a wide definition of diaspora. It's a more practical operation, a narrow definition. These are all Greek citizens living abroad. Now, The Greek diaspora, which we can measure in terms of trips that they perform, individuals that travel to Athens, was somewhere in the order of 200, 250,000 and grew to 300,000. And you see here from 2007 to 2012, we had a modest growth of about 4% a year. And then we measured something which was pretty weird. This curve went up on a yearly basis at about an annual growth rate of 12%, which we couldn't easily explain. At that time, we didn't know what was going on. And then we realized that obviously there is a new element of diaspora which has totally different ways of looking at the motherland. Through the liberalizations and the low-cost travel in Europe, they have a totally different behavior compared to the traditional diaspora. And only within 4 years, this number of diaspora trips doubled. And you see that now in the last 2 years, since 2016, and this is the case also for 2019, we see a flat development. Potentially, we cannot explain this yet, but potentially it means that the new diaspora slowly adopts the behavior of the old diaspora. Now we know that based on the studies that have been performed by the Bank of Greece, by the SEESOX project and others, that this sort of upwards movement that we experienced, particularly between 2012 and 2016, was driven by those that we now call commuting diaspora. They have a totally different travel behavior. Those that travel, they travel about 5 times a year on average to Greece. So it's a totally different behavior to the traditional diaspora. Where do they come from? Predominantly from the European continent. In those years, between 2016 and 2006 and 2018, we observed a growth of more than 200%. And the more opportunistic, let's say, diaspora in the Gulf is the one that shows the highest growth, both in terms of number of the diaspora itself, or the Greek citizens working there, but also in terms of travel. They are the ones that apparently commute mostly between their place of work and Greece. The other parts of the world, like the North America or Southeast Asia and Australia, are more, the traditional diaspora, not so much impacted by the latest phenomenon. Something that is very interesting for us in the business is that something which we now, based on the work performed for this project, we call the one-to-one travel diaspora equilibrium, meaning that when we measure the number of trips of people living outside Greece going into the motherland, they at the same time generate, by them being outside the country, equal number of trips by Greeks visiting them. So for every person that generates a trip as a member of the diaspora into Greece, we have an additional trip of a Greek traveling what we call a one-to-one equilibrium, meaning when we measured in total, 15% of our traffic at Athens is diaspora-driven, which is very important now to understand. And we have performed, in order to sort of dive into more detail, we have performed during the last 3 months for this, actually, for the SEESOX project, a more dedicated survey. And we've tried to look, we've done more than 300 interviews trying to analyze some patterns and some choices and characteristics of the old versus the new diaspora. Obviously, I will provide you with 3 teasers here. Our team back in Athens has many more data, which I think can be very interesting for the further analysis by the SEESOX team. On the one hand, we have the up to 2010 diaspora, which we call the old diaspora. They are 21 years abroad. They are actually, despite the fact that they come from a much bigger base compared to the new diaspora of the 450,000, they comprise only 46% of the people that we found in these 3 months. They are middle-aged, 45 years on average, and they are married and have children, and 70%. On the green part, which is the new diaspora, for some reason, at least those that we were able to spot at the airport were predominantly ladies. So there is a bigger number, I'm not sure whether this is statistically significant, of females, and they are younger, obviously, 34 years of age, and they have an average stay outside the country of 4 years. And just to leave you with 3 messages. We asked them, this is their travel behavior, what do they do when they come to Greece? And in Greece, in the tourism industry, we have some questions because our numbers, I mean, the people flying into the country increases, but the hoteliers complain that they don't see the same numbers in their hotels. One, obviously, explanation is the Airbnb and the sharing economy. This is, however, not the case with the diaspora. Diaspora predominantly stays at their own or family or friends' properties, and you see there that there is no involvement of Airbnb or hotels. Maybe you can confirm this, or this means that our work is obviously statistically not significant. The next one relates to the intention of the old versus the new diaspora to return. And there you see differences. The old diaspora, as you see on the left-hand side, 84% is a no, whereas with the new diaspora, the green part, 51% is a no, so it's still more than 50% in terms of an answer. But if you look at the reasons of return, 40% from the new diaspora sees, in case of an improvement of the professional conditions in the country, sees an opportunity or is prepared to consider returning, which is an issue relating to the brain drain. And I will leave you with the last message, which is the challenge for the SEESOX project. When we ask the diaspora, how do they engage, and in their new countries of residence, or how do they engage in supporting Greece, the vast majority of the replies, as you see there, both in their, for the old diaspora, but also primarily for the new diaspora, is none. So this is truly a challenge for the SEESOX Diaspora Project, apart from being a study to have an impact in engaging the diaspora in various forms, being it investment, being it philanthropy, being other things for the Greek cause. Thank you very much, and I obviously look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Yanis, and also for sharing a kind of paradox with us, which is that here's this new diaspora, which itself commutes and goes home so much more, and yet engages so much less, apparently, from this very unique standpoint that you have from Athens Airport. So that's quite, thank you, a challenge to us. There's nothing better than a challenge to provoke our intellectual response. And for this, I turn now to Antonis Kamaras, who, of course, can observe from the other side, he's at Oxford, since he represents us, SEESOX in Greece. And so you can tell us whether, what do you do with Yanis's challenge here? Is he right that the engagement of the diaspora, especially on the economic front, is none, or are you going to push back against this diagnosis? Antonis.
Well, in the economy, numerically speaking, very few entities and individuals can have an overwhelming impact. So we can really often, when we're looking at big investments in Greece, you see people who obviously are extremely wealthy, who are willing to make a bet in the country, who originate from the diaspora. Their mentality is not that of the average diaspora person. I mean, they have the resources to analyze where the country is going and to decide either to make a bet on the country or not. And having said that, we also need to consider the fact that Greece was very much an economy which was it was not highly competitive internationally. So when the country went bankrupt, the capital that was accumulated in Greece also, to a very significant degree, was destroyed. So where is the money? The money is in the diaspora, because the diaspora operates in jurisdictions which are much larger than Greece, or operates on a global scale in a way that most of our Greek corporations and businessmen do not. So the diaspora, either people who are owners themselves of major corporations, or individuals who have very high management positions in multinational enterprises, to the extent they believe that Greece will be promised in the next 10, 20 years, obviously they can mobilize resources to the benefit of the Greek economy, which can be immensely important. And we see that already in some of the major transactions, like the development of the Hellenic Airport, major concessions, like in the Thessaloniki port, and you have a whole range, people who might come from Switzerland, from the Russian Federation, from New York. So these are not your average, obviously, diaspora individuals. When we're discussing the economy, also we need to take into account the bottom-up approach. We know in Greece that the crisis has released many individuals, it has compelled them to become much more entrepreneurial. So we have the growth of the startup scene of high-tech entrepreneurship. And there the diaspora can be very important in providing access and scalability to these startup entrepreneurs. And if I can just mention an example, and I can close here, you see the alumni associations of Ivy League institutions like MIT in Greece, how they have plugged into their network of Greek Americans in Boston. And you also have some other startup companies which have grown international, and they're very much supporting strategically this internationalization of a high-tech startup community.
Well, thank you, Andonis. And you just mentioned the US. And so perhaps it will be very illustrative to then turn to really a personal experience. And I'm now turning to Alexandros Arioriou, who indeed, as you've all heard, is our new chair of the Hellenic board of SEESOX, and we welcome you in this role. We're extremely honored that you've taken up this role. In your day job, you are chair and CEO of the Eurolife Insurance Group, and we know that you've spent a lot of time, many years, 10 years in the US beforehand. So can you share with us what was that experience as a Greek working in the United States, and what made you decide to come back and to be part of this returning diaspora, and what are the lessons that you can share with us?
Thank you, Calypso. First of all, let me say that I'm deeply honored not only to be here, but to have succeeded Nikos Karamouzis at the chair of SEESOX Advisory Board. It is a tall order to succeed Nikos at anything, but especially now here, he has done a terrific job in a very difficult period for Greece. And I think we're now entering a new period with the economy turning the page, with a new government, and so there's a lot more to be done. So thank you, Nico, and we'll try to build on what you've started. So yes, indeed, I bring the perspective of from the US, yeah, let me share with you my personal story very, very briefly. So I left at 18 seeking better educational opportunities in the US, where I studied and then I stayed, worked. So in total, I spent the first 16 adult years of my life in the US, basically in New York. At that point, there was a significant, we had forgotten about Greece, both my wife and I, except there was a unique opportunity in Greece. This is 1992. And As I say, I was lucky enough to return before the party, so I enjoyed the party coming back and then the catastrophe. But had that unique opportunity not presented itself and it was just something by chance, we would not have returned. But as I was thinking about my path in the US, I realized that I was the third generation of my family that had emigrated to the US, and for different reasons. So in the early noughts of the 20th century, so 1906, 7, my grandmother's generation had emigrated to the US. The typical grocery store, diner, etc., etc. My mother's generation emigrated to the US, some members, her brother, went to a good university, became very successful businessman. Their children are Greek Americans, or as I prefer to say in some cases, Americans of Greek descent, doing well for the most part. And then I emigrated for studies, and my daughters now live in the US. They went to study there, and they live permanently in the US. Now, I'll use a term that I learned today from Antonis, which is transnational. I think I am transnational because I pay taxes on both sides, I have houses on both sides, and I commute a lot across the Atlantic. My daughters are certainly transnational because they are absolutely Greek, but they are New Yorkers as well, and they are back and forth equally comfortable on both sides. All these, in having talked about these experiences, I see three categories of Greek immigrants, at least in the US. One is the pure economic immigrant who, in the US, to use the stereotype, has a very successful diner, is making a lot of money. His life is the US, the local community in the US, and he goes back to his village or his town in the summer and hopes to retire there. That's all he's looking for from Greece, possibly to retire there. The second is the transnationals, the people who went, I'm not talking about the crisis here necessarily, but studied, good studies, maybe have a job on Wall Street or are professors at the university. To them, as I see it, Greece is there, they feel very comfortable with Greece, but there's not much that's interesting there. There are no private universities in Greece, and here I'm talking to academia. You know, I recently went to Cyprus, and I was very impressed by what I saw there. So if I'm in academia in the US or in the UK, I don't know how many opportunities, what opportunities would present themselves for me in Greece. If I work at Goldman Sachs, you know, I'm looking at Greece, the pay is not there, the opportunities are very limited, things are small, so maybe, but, you know, there's not much happening there. And then the Greek Americans of the second, third generation, or Americans of Greek descent, to them, Greece is yaya and papoose of some summers, and maybe Moussaka Day, where, you know, I would not go, but, you know, some people who see Greece as folklore would go. So these are three different categories of the diaspora. And the question is, what can Greece do now to attract these people back to Greece? So we go from a Greece with an outstretched hand seeking help to a Greece with open arms presenting opportunities to these people. And let me close by using two examples, one in business and academia and the other in business. So if you're doing an MBA in the US, between the 2 years, the summer internship is critical. It's critical for your resume, it's critical for your job after the MBA. So yes, maybe you're gonna get a job at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, but then other people go to other countries and do interesting internships. Whenever you hear the list of these countries, and I'm on the board of a university in the US, so I'm sort of familiar with the situation. Greece is not there, yet you hear Turkey, you hear Portugal, you hear countries like that. So I'm saying, and my company is trying to do it, by the way, we have programs which work with a major university in the United States, where people do work for us, therefore realize that there's this medium-sized, by world standards, insurance company that is civilized and is the same as if you were anywhere in the world. And now we're trying to entice some students to come do a summer internship with us. We do plenty of those in Greece with Greek students, but the question is to entice foreigners to come. And of course, the prime candidates among foreigners are Greek descent people. The other point is, and I guess, again, a 60-second case study. There's a startup in Boston, a former startup that does artificial intelligence and machine learning, established and run by a brilliant guy who just raised $600 million. This was his second tranche. So this is about $1 billion company now. This guy is, having met certain people in Greece and having understood that there is IT talent in Greece that is economical and very able, is thinking of setting up his European hub in Greece. I will say that IT outsourcing, the #1 country is India, the #2 country is Cluj, Romania. Okay, so if it can happen in Cluj, why do we have great IT people working in London, in New York, all over the world, and not finding jobs in Greece? Why can't we attract these companies to come and create some jobs? Now, for this to happen, I think we need a government that is business-friendly and a government that is outward-looking. And I think the new government at least has started giving very good signals in both those areas. And I think the work that we do here, you do at SEESOX, can be instrumental in developing policy proposals that could then hopefully turn into real policy, both in economics and in social areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexandros, for drawing on your own experience to remind us of what we're all saying in one way or another, which is that there's not one holistic diaspora, so many different profiles. We already heard it from Yanis and Manolis and Andonis, and except the one exception I would say is I can testify personally that you can both be from the academic diaspora and a Moussaka fanatic. So I conflate your categories. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But you mentioned that at the end of your conversation, your intervention, indeed, what we all know, new government, diaspora friendly, but what does it mean? And for what reason? This is not about altruism, it's about political interest. And so this is the issue of the day, diaspora voting. Why should the diaspora have a vote? Who thinks the diaspora should have a vote? Why? Which political parties in Greece have taken what stance? And what do we think about it? So, Othan, I'm turning back to you to answer this difficult question. Or at least to get the debate started, because you can't give us a final answer.
I think that's a better way of putting it, like get the debate started, because the issue of vote is particularly crucial today, and it's been also for the last 2 years, but it's also part of the wider political engagement of the diaspora and how it kind of sees and relates to homeland politically. And we all know in a historical sense that diasporas have been very active, especially in the United States, in issues of foreign policy, Greek-Turkish relations, the Cyprus issue during the military junta back in the 1960s, 70s. So we've seen some political activism coming from communities in US or Australia. Now, the recent wave of migrants, the 400,000 that Manolis referred to, they have put the issue of vote very much at the center of attention. There are two schools of thought, basically, and roughly speaking. One is the inclusionary school of thinking, which says that Greek citizens abroad, those who are Greek citizens, they should be facilitated to vote, because according to the Constitution, Greek citizens, wherever they are, they have the right to vote. So it's an issue of how you facilitate them to do it and not have them pay those very expensive tickets in order to go to Greece and vote. There is the inclusionary, and then there is the exclusionary. Those who say no, they shouldn't vote. There are many reasons for this. They say that those who believe that they shouldn't be allowed or facilitated rather to vote is because they're abroad, that they're not connected with the internal affairs of Greece. Why should they choose the government when they live outside? Why the dual citizens should have, voting here and there? Are they the true Greeks in terms of their own identity? Do they feel more Americans or Australians? So these are issues that actually at the societal level that are being seriously discussed. And in terms of the inclusionary approach, that is actually the degrees of support here, in the sense that there are questions such as who from diaspora should vote, whom should diaspora vote for, and how would they vote? Now, these are three very, very important questions that have been also troubling the previous political elites, but also the current, in terms of who. It's more straightforward to say that those Greek citizens who are already in the electoral role should be facilitated wherever they are. But then, who are the other Greeks that you should facilitate? I mean, the second and the third generations, and ones that Alexander said that don't feel as much Greeks. Should they be facilitated to vote? So that's a very, very, the most difficult question, actually, who. And the second question is, what do you vote for? Do you vote for deputies of the electoral district in which they're registered? Do you vote for a general electoral national list, or for a separate ballot of candidate members from the Greek diaspora community? And this is where also the political parties are currently divided. The third question refers to whether this is a postal vote, is it a vote in consulates, is it a vote by delegates, is it an electronic vote? So all these are very, very important questions. And the issue of vote is actually important in two ways. First of all, it is an issue of human rights, because you don't want to have first-class and second-class citizens, the ones that can vote and the ones that are not allowed or not facilitated to vote. And the second is political considerations. And that has been all along the problem with political parties, in that all of them actually cannot deny that they should facilitate Greek citizens abroad to be able to vote, but they never actually legislate that. And that has to do with political cost considerations and the fact that they cannot operate with this unknown abroad electorate and constituencies that they cannot either offer them clientelistic, or other services. So that is a very, very important consideration that has not allowed this issue to sort it. At the end of the day, we need to think of this right to vote, first as a right of the Greek citizens to be able to vote, and secondly, we can also think of it, those of us who are in favor, as an instrument to make those Greeks abroad, even those who are not that interested in Greece, actually to make them much more interested and politically engaged in the affairs of the country.
Thank you, Othon. I am sure you will provoke reactions from the room. And actually, I already had my own personal reaction going back to Alexandros' story about the artificial intelligence entrepreneur. Why don't we ask him to devise an algorithm so we can take a test to decide how Greek we feel, and therefore whether we should have the right to vote back in the homeland? That could be kind of creative, right? But before we go to him, I want to turn back to our ambassador and ask you what you make out of this. When you talked to us earlier, you referred to your lifelong experience engaging with various diasporas, and here you are now in London. How do you see the state of play?
Well, what I said and what I believe is that there is a very intricate and very strong link between the diaspora and the motherland. But additionally, there is common interest in this relationship. We live now in changing times, times that provide many opportunities, provide technology, provide ease of contact. So the interaction between the motherland and the diaspora can be easier, more effective, and actually it doesn't need to be reinvented, but it not just needs to be enhanced. But it's a mistake to expect that there should be some norms, some plan that must be devised from the government in the motherland to organize the activities of Greeks in the diaspora. This is a mistake for two reasons. One, because the diaspora in itself, the associations and organizations have the capacity of doing that for their own interests, which are of dual meaning, national interests, but only their own local interests. And second, because this is a partnership. It's not in one way or a one-dimensional relationship. So it has to be two-way. Now, in this big, wider picture, voting is one element. I think, if I may make a comment on what I heard so far, there is a misconception, and I think it's mostly unintentional, but in cases it is intentional, about whether voting is the right and since there is no mechanism to vote, that this right is abused. First of all, this right is enshrined in the Constitution. So there is no way that any government can abolish it unless the Constitution changes. Of course, the issue is not so simple because since the Constitution envisaged this right, the political parties in Greece, the successive governments and the parliaments, have not found the required majority to vote on a law, and secondary law, that will implement this right. The reason is not, again, simple. It's not a matter of political affiliation that we assume that the diaspora has. There are serious technical parameters that have been faced by other countries as well. You know, there are basically, Greece is one in the minority of countries that has not a mechanism of voting, although it recognizes the right. There are countries that do not have that. The question is equally complicated for countries that have large diasporas. And there are some criteria, and this is where the difficulty begins. The criteria have to do with what sort of involvement the diaspora has in politics in the homeland, and how you can determine that. Other countries choose a length of stay abroad. So over continuous stay of some years, you're not allowed to vote anymore. The Americans do that, the French do that.
And the Brexit referendum, if you had been
yes,
15 years...
Yes. Other countries choose, decide to choose how much you're involved in your own country by how much vested your interests are in there. So if you're taxed in your country, obviously you have a right to vote because you can determine your future. But if you're just Greek, you have the nationality, but you've never been involved in any interest in Greece, maybe you should not. So all this amalgam of criteria is what is really of concern. After 2 years, setting up an inter-party committee to decide on the parameters of the law, the new government has put a proposal that's been discussed. Actually, as we speak, I think there is a meeting of the heads of the parties tomorrow in Greece to find a common ground and proceed with a law that requires a high majority. That's why it's been not voted on. And I think rightly so, it requires a high majority because this prevents every government to change it. But again, I say that voting is an aspect of both the state that has an obligation to allow, to find the mechanisms that people that have the right to vote and want to vote to do so, but it's also a show of interest on the part of the diaspora. And I don't know if this is a measure of interest, but as you know, there is an exception that although we don't have voting of Greeks abroad, we have the voting in consulates or embassies around the world on the European election, the European Parliament elections. You know, over the years, these elections have not managed to attract a lot of interest. Of course, the conditions are not ideal. In some countries, there are very few voting polls. The process to register is not 100% one-button thing, but still, the turnout was very low. And these are usually, as it happens in Greece, politically sensitive elections. It's not that people are disinterested about the European elections, which happens in some countries of the EU. So I want to say that although there is a will, and usually when there is a will, there is a way, the issue is quite complicated. And I think it's better to have a process, a longer process that will end up in a system, in a method that would be widely acceptable and will not have to be revisited or changed, rather than hastily move to a decision.
Thank you for these wise remarks, Ambassador, because you're reminding us that this issue is not either or, it's a complex one. And indeed, that on one hand, there are the kind of broad principles that you remind us of, may they be economic or political, but it's not obvious to decide who deserves to vote. Very important right. But can we all agree, too, that as political parties and individuals, politicians, make up their mind about this issue, it's not only based on these big principles, but they also look at their projected interest. And in this sense, you heard in the film that Othon presented earlier, that we've developed this amazing digital map. And we believe in the team that the map will become increasingly relevant as parties will try to map out and understand the characteristic of the diaspora and basically ask, will they vote for me or not? Let's not beat around the bush. So to give you a bit of more sense of what we did with this map, I now turn to our Leventis research officer, Fotini Kalanzi, who you've met already in the film, and who's going to say a few more words about our digital map.
Thank you, Calypso. So one of the focal points of our project in SEESOX is the analysis of the interrelation between Greece and its diaspora throughout the prism of economic, political, and social criteria. Therefore, it is essential to create a network between the people in Greece and those living all around the world, but also between the diasporic Greeks. This led to the creation of our digital map and a later stage interactive. So not only does it serve as a record of the Greek presence worldwide, but also it provides a platform for communication for the global Hellenism. In other words, it constitutes a digital bridge between the homeland and those abroad. What is important is that by making the diaspora aware of its worldwide organizational expression, it enhances also the ability of the diaspora communities and actors to coordinate between themselves and the homeland entities. In this sense, our map is a unique openly accessible tool. We have about 4,000 organizations and associations, categorized with a variety of criteria, such as religious or economic or business, etc. And our aim, of course, is to enrich this data. And already we have been kindly donated all this data by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Education, Onassis Foundation, and the Center of Greek Language. So the construction of the map not only serves the purposes I already mentioned, but also it helps us as researchers to make qualitative and quantitative analysis and be able to answer questions regarding the profile and characteristics, but also the evolution of the Greek diaspora. And lately we have upgraded our map, in which we will show you in a very short video how to use it. If I could have the video, thank you.
The Greek Diaspora digital map serves as a record of the Greek presence worldwide and also provides a networking tool for global Hellenism. Visit SEESOXdiaspora.org and click the Greek Diaspora map on the top right. A welcome message will appear introducing the project. In separate tabs, you can find information about the donors as well as help on how to navigate the map. By clicking on the top right stack icon, you can choose among 6 different map styles for your search. Continue to map and select country, activity, or origin in order to filter your results. A different colour marks each activity, which is defined by social, cultural, religious, educational, political, or economic criteria. Choose a result and scroll down the left sidebar to see contact details and additional information on that specific organisation. Click on the tab Graphs to see a visualisation of your selection. The cloud icon with the downward arrow lets you download your selected data in the form of an Excel file. Use the reset button to clear your filters and start a new search.
Because you can answer questions after. Yeah. Great, and thank you, David, for the voiceover. You've all recognized David. When we want to have gravitas and get rid of our Greco-Franco accents, we turn to David. So this being said, this is the right moment to turn to all of you. You've been very patient. We still have much to share with you, especially on the diaspora, the characteristics of the diaspora here in the UK. So Manolis would like to speak a bit about the survey that he's conducted. And Donis has data to share on the philanthropy, the ambassador, on the political the dynamics of the UK diaspora. And I'll turn back to them at some point. But in fact, I beg you to ask them questions about these specific issues. But if you don't, I will.